My wife ridiculed my manhood at couples retreat, until the therapist asked for my number, and she watched her marriage crumble before her eyes. Update 1. The sound of her laughter still echoes in my mind, not the kind warm laughter I fell in love with years ago, but the cruel mocking kind that has become all too familiar in our marriage. I never thought I'd be sitting in the passenger seat of our SUV, driving toward a couple's retreat that cost 3 months of savings, all because I couldn't remember the last time we had a conversation that didn't end with me feeling worthless. The fighting had become routine over the past 2 years, small disagreements escalating into her tearing down everything about me, my career choices, my physique, and recently the most intimate aspects of my manhood. It started with subtle jabs, growing increasingly public and humiliating. Last month at her company dinner, she made a joke about my shortcomings that left her colleagues awkwardly avoiding eye contact with me for the rest of the evening. "You're being too sensitive," she would say whenever I confronted her. "It's just a joke. Don't you have thicker skin than that?" But the pain in my chest each time suggested otherwise. Each comment chipped away at whatever confidence I had left. The man she married, ambitious, self-assured, passionate, was fading away, replaced by someone who second-guessed every decision, every word. The GPS announced our exit was approaching. The retreat center was nestled in the mountains, a 3-hour drive from the suburban life we built together. The brochure promised transformative experiences and renewed intimate connections through innovative therapy techniques. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew something needed to change. "Did you remember to pack my hiking boots?" she asked, breaking the tense silence that had filled the car since our argument that morning about leaving late. "Yes, they're in the blue duffel," I replied, keeping my eyes on the winding road ahead. I had triple-checked everything before loading the car, knowing any forgotten item would become ammunition. The retreat center appeared as we rounded the bend, a sprawling wooden lodge with floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the surrounding pines. Several couples were already unloading their luggage, some laughing together, others maintaining the same tense distance I felt in our vehicle. "Well, it's certainly isolated," she remarked. "A whole week trapped here. Hope you're ready to actually participate this time." I bit back her response, remembering our therapist's advice about choosing battles wisely. This retreat was my last-ditch effort to save what remained of our marriage. 7 days of intensive couples therapy, outdoor activities and structured conversations designed to rebuild intimacy. The knot in my stomach tightened as I considered the possibility of more public humiliation among strangers. As I pulled into a parking space, I noticed a woman greeting arriving couples. Something about her presence, confident yet warm, caught my attention. She moved between the guests with ease, her clipboard tucked under one arm as she offered firm handshakes and genuine smiles. "That must be the lead therapist," I said, more to myself than to my wife. "Well, let's hope she's better than the last one who couldn't see how unreasonable you were being about everything." I took a deep breath and turned off the engine. The mountain air hit my lungs as I stepped out. Crisp, clean, invigorating. For just a moment, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps this place, this week, these professionals could help us find our way back to each other, or at the very least, help me find my way back to myself. The lead therapist turned as we approached, her eyes piercing and perceptive, meeting mine. She extended her hand. "Welcome to New Beginnings Retreat. I'm the senior relationship counselor here. You must be the couple from registration group C." My wife stepped forward, turning on the charm she reserved for important people. "Yes, that's us. We've heard wonderful things about your program." The therapist's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than seemed normal, her expression suggesting she'd already observed something meaningful in our brief interaction. I couldn't help but wonder what she saw. Another failing marriage, or perhaps something more specific about the dynamic between us. "The welcome session begins in 30 minutes in the main hall," she said, her voice carrying a gentle authority. "Until then, feel free to settle into your cabin. Your information packets are waiting inside." As we walked toward our assigned cabin, I caught her watching us, making notes on her clipboard. Something about her attentiveness made me nervous yet oddly comforted. Someone was finally paying attention, really paying attention to what was happening between us. I just hoped I was prepared for whatever truth this week would reveal. The main hall buzzed with nervous energy as 12 couples sat in a circle of plush chairs. Our welcome packets contained the week's schedule, ground rules, and a series of questionnaires we'd complete throughout our stay. I thumbed through the papers while my wife chatted with the couple beside us, a businessman and his much younger partner, who seemed equally uncomfortable. "Let's begin by introducing ourselves," the lead therapist announced, commanding attention instantly. "I'll be guiding your journey this week alongside my colleagues." She gestured to 2 other professionals seated across the circle. "Our goal isn't to fix anyone, but to create space for honest communication and renewed connection." As couples introduced themselves, I noticed patterns emerging. The overly enthusiastic pairs, trying too hard to seem perfect. The openly hostile ones who couldn't get through an introduction without contradicting each other. And the quiet, defeated ones who barely made eye contact. I wondered where we fell on this spectrum of brokenness. When our turn came, my wife squeezed my hand, a public display of affection that felt jarring after months of cold distance. "We've been married for 7 years, she began with practiced charm. "We're here because we've lost our spark and need to reconnect." Her sanitized version of our problems made me shift uncomfortably. The lead therapist's eyes met mine as if sensing the unspoken reality. "And what are you hoping to gain from this retreat specifically?" she asked me directly. Before I could answer, my wife jumped in. He needs to rediscover his confidence. He's become so passive lately. It's affecting everything. She laughed lightly. Sometimes I feel like I married a lion, and now I'm living with a house cat. Several men in the circle chuckled awkwardly while their partners shot them knowing looks. Heat crept up my neck as the familiar shame washed over me. I'd still like to hear from you, the therapist persisted, keeping her focus on me despite my wife's interruption. I cleared my throat. I want to learn how to be heard, I said simply, surprised by my own honesty. The therapist nodded thoughtfully. That's a good place to start. Our first exercise involves splitting into separate rooms, men with the male counselor, women with the female assistant. The lead therapist floated between groups, observing. In our circle, men reluctantly shared frustrations that mirrored my own, feeling undervalued, misunderstood, or emasculated. Society tells us to be vulnerable, then punishes us when we are, one man said bitterly. Murmurs of agreement rippled through our group. Now you can watch the second part by pressing share and more. My wife ridiculed my manhood at couples retreat, until the therapist asked for my number, and she watched her marriage crumble before her eyes. Update 2. When the lead therapist entered our room, the energy shifted subtly. She leaned against the wall listening intently as each man spoke. When my turn came I described the constant criticism without mentioning the specific intimate humiliations. It sounds like your self-worth has become dependent on your partner's approval, she observed. Isn't that normal in a marriage? I asked. Interdependence is healthy, emotional subjugation is not. Her words hit with precision. Your value exists independent of her recognition of it. When the groups rejoined for dinner, the atmosphere had changed. Some couples sat closer, others maintained careful distance. My wife was unusually quiet, picking at her salmon while avoiding eye contact. What did you talk about in your session? I asked, attempting conversation. Nothing important, just venting about annoying husband habits. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. What about you? Did you all complain about your demanding wives? We talked about communication patterns, I replied, not taking the bait. The importance of speaking without judgment. She snorted. Did they give you a backbone implant while they were at it? I set down my fork, suddenly tired. I'm trying here. This whole retreat was my idea. Remember? Yes, she said, another expensive solution. Instead of just being the man I married. The lead therapist passed our table just as my wife's comment landed. She paused imperceptibly, her expression neutral, yet somehow knowing. How's dinner, folks? Don't forget, we have our evening visualization exercise at 8. After she moved on, my wife leaned forward. She seems to take a special interest in our conversations. She's doing her job, I replied, though I'd noticed it too. A particular attentiveness that felt different from how she interacted with other couples. The evening exercise involved writing letters to our younger selves at the beginning of our relationships. As I penned warnings to that hopeful, confident version of me, I felt the lead therapist's presence behind my chair. She leaned down slightly, reading my words. Interesting insight, she whispered. Maybe tomorrow we should schedule an individual session. Sometimes we need to understand ourselves before we can be understood by others. I nodded, surprised by both the suggestion and the flicker of anticipation it sparked within me. For the first time since arriving, I felt something beyond resignation, a tentative hope that someone might actually see me, not just the diminished version of myself I'd become in this marriage. As she walked away, I noticed my wife watching our interaction. Her eyes narrowed with an expression I couldn't quite place but recognized as dangerous. Morning light filtered through pine trees as I made my way to the small office for my individual session. My wife had been surprisingly supportive of the idea, which only heightened my suspicion. Go ahead, she'd said over breakfast. Maybe they can fix whatever's going on with you. Her words carried their usual sting, but I was growing numb to them. The lead therapist greeted me at her door, motioning toward a comfortable armchair across from her desk. The office was warm and inviting. Bookshelves lined with psychology texts, large windows overlooking the mountains, and notably absent of the typical therapist's couch. I appreciate you making time for this, I said, settling into the chair. I make time when I see someone ready for meaningful change, she replied, sitting across from me. Yesterday's exercises revealed patterns I think we should explore. For the next hour we discussed my life before marriage, my confidence in my career, my self-assured approach to relationships, my optimistic outlook. Then came the methodical excavation of how that changed. The therapist took notes occasionally, but mostly maintained eye contact that felt both uncomfortable and necessary. When did you first notice yourself becoming smaller in your marriage? She asked. The question caught me off guard with its accuracy. Smaller, that's exactly how it feels. That's what emotional diminishment does. We shrink to accommodate another's need for space or control. I described the early years, subtle criticisms that seemed constructive at first, jokes at my expense that I laughed off to seem easygoing. Gradual isolation from friends who weren't good enough, according to my wife. And the more intimate criticisms, she asked carefully. When did those begin? He crept up my neck about 2 years ago after a work promotion. Mine, not hers. Interesting timing. Success often triggers insecurity in partners with control issues. I hadn't considered this perspective before. I thought she'd be happy for me. Sometimes what appears as contempt is actually fear, she said. Your success threatened the power dynamic she'd established. We moved deeper into uncomfortable territory. The bedroom criticisms, the public humiliations, the systematic dismantling of my confidence. What you're describing is emotional abuse, she said, matter-of-factly, no judgment, no surprise, just clear recognition. Men can't be abused, I said automatically, repeating what I'd heard countless times. That's precisely the cultural narrative that keeps many men trapped in damaging relationships. Her voice softened. The psychological impact is no less real because of your gender. Something broke open inside me. A dam holding back years of confusion and pain. I hadn't cried in front of another person since my father's funeral 8 years ago, but tears came now, quiet but unstoppable. She waited patiently, offering tissues without comment. When I regained composure, she leaned forward slightly. I noticed something about you that perhaps you've forgotten. You possess tremendous emotional intelligence and resilience. The fact that you initiated this retreat, that you're sitting here now doing this difficult work, these aren't the actions of a weak person. Her words landed like rain on parched soil. I couldn't remember the last time someone had seen strength in me rather than deficiency. What your wife mocks as inadequacy, I see as thoughtfulness. What she frames as weakness, I recognize as empathy. She glanced at her notes. Your colleagues must value these qualities in your leadership. How did you know I'm in a leadership position? You mentioned my promotion, but more than that, you speak like someone accustomed to considering multiple perspectives. That's rare and valuable. Our session ended with practical strategies for setting boundaries, techniques for responding to public humiliation, phrases to interrupt negative patterns, permission to prioritize my emotional well-being. I'd like to observe your interactions more closely during group exercises, she said as I prepared to leave. With your permission, of course, that would be helpful, I replied, surprised by how much lighter I felt after just one conversation. As I reached for the door, she spoke again. One more thing, the retreat has a confidentiality policy. What we discuss stays between us, unless you choose to share it. I nodded gratefully, knowing my wife would interrogate me about the session. Now you can watch the third part, by pressing share and more. My wife ridiculed my manhood at couples retreat, until the therapist asked for my number and she watched her marriage crumble before her eyes. Update 3, returning to our cabin I found my wife waiting, her posture tense. Well, how was your private therapy? The emphasis suggested impropriety. Helpful, I said simply, using one of my newly learned techniques. We identified some communication patterns to work on. Did she tell you on the problem? She asked. That seems to be her specialty with the husbands here. Her tone was accusatory. Actually, we focused entirely on my responses, not on you at all. This wasn't entirely true, but it deflected the conversation. My wife seemed dissatisfied with this answer, but couldn't find an angle of attack. The group trust exercise starts in 20 minutes, she said finally. Try not to embarrass us. Walking to the main hall, I replayed the therapist's words about strength and emotional intelligence. For the first time in years, I considered the possibility that the problem wasn't my inadequacy, but the relationship's toxicity. The revelation was both terrifying and liberating, like discovering a door in a room I believed had no exit. I wasn't sure yet if I would walk through it, but knowing it existed changed everything. The afternoon trust exercise was designed to expose vulnerabilities. Couples sat facing each other while answering increasingly personal questions provided by the therapists. Each pair was spaced far enough apart for privacy, but the energy in the room remained palpable as emotional revelations rippled through the group. Some couples clasped hands in solidarity, others maintained careful distance. My wife and I sat cross-legged on meditation cushions, knees almost touching but not quite. The lead therapist circulated among the couples, occasionally pausing to observe or offer guidance. When she approached our area, I noticed my wife straightening her posture, adjusting her voice to sound more engaged and affectionate. Remember, the therapist addressed the entire group. This exercise isn't about performance or saying what you think your partner wants to hear. It's about authentic communication, perhaps expressing things you've never said aloud before. My wife smiled tightly. We've always been good at honesty, haven't we? The irony wasn't lost on me, but I nodded anyway. The first few questions were manageable, discussing early impressions, favorite shared memories, moments of pride in one another. My wife excelled at this performance, recounting stories that painted our relationship in glowing terms while the therapist was within earshot. Then came the more challenging prompts. Share something about yourself that you feel shame about, something your partner may not fully understand. The card trembled slightly in my hand as I read it aloud. My wife went first, describing work insecurities that seemed calculated to appear vulnerable while actually highlighting her accomplishments. When my turn came, I hesitated, weighing how honest to be. I feel shame about how much I've changed, I finally said, about how I've allowed myself to become diminished in our relationship. Her eyes narrowed. What does that even mean? It means I used to trust my own judgment, to feel confident in my decisions and myself. Now I second guess everything. She scoffed. So it's my fault for your insecurity. I noticed the lead therapist pausing nearby, pretending to adjust something in her notes while clearly listening. I'm not assigning blame, I said carefully. I'm answering the question about my shame that I haven't stood up for myself when I should have. Stand up against what? Me supporting you. Me pushing you to be better. Her voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby couples. The next card asked about unfulfilled needs in the relationship. I braced myself as my wife took her turn. I need a partner who isn't so fragile, she began, her voice carrying further than necessary. Someone who doesn't wilt under the slightest criticism. Someone who acts like a man in all areas of life. She emphasized the last words with a pointed look that made her meaning unmistakable. Heat crawled up my neck as several nearby participants shifted uncomfortably, clearly overhearing. The lead therapist stopped pretending not to listen, watching our interaction with intent focus. Your response seems to contain criticism rather than expressing your own needs, the therapist observed, stepping closer. Can you try rephrasing in terms of what you genuinely need? My wife's smile didn't reach her eyes. I need physical and emotional strength from my partner. Is that better phrased? Perhaps, the therapist replied. Though strength manifests in many ways beyond the conventional. After my wife's display, it would have been easy to retreat into safe answers, but something in me had shifted. I need respect, I said simply. Not just publicly but privately. I need to feel valued rather than constantly measured and found wanting. My wife rolled her eyes. This is exactly. Please allow him to finish. The therapist interjected firmly. I need to be seen as a full person, not just a collection of perceived shortcomings, I continued, surprised by my own steady voice. And I need acknowledgement that manhood isn't defined by arbitrary standards or physical attributes. The therapist nodded encouragingly. That's a profound need to be accepted in your wholeness rather than reduced to parts or performances. My wife's face flushed with anger. So now you're taking his side. I thought therapists were supposed to be neutral. Supporting someone's expression of genuine needs isn't taking sides, the therapist replied calmly. It's facilitating honest communication, which is precisely my role. The tension between them was unmistakable. My wife excused herself shortly after, claiming a headache that required rest in our cabin. As other couples continued the exercise, the therapist approached me. That took courage, she said quietly. It didn't feel like courage, it felt like desperation. The two often coexist, she replied. She checked her watch. We have an outdoor activity scheduled next, but if you'd prefer some time to process what just happened, that's perfectly reasonable. Actually, I could use the distraction, I admitted. The group activity involved a nature walk focused on mindfulness with couples deliberately separated to encourage individual reflection. As we gathered by the trailhead, I noticed the lead therapist organizing the hiking order, strategically placing me in her own group while my wife was assigned to her colleague's supervision. During the walk, she kept our conversation professional, but occasionally offered observations that felt personal in their insight. Notice how much clearer everything appears when you're not viewing it through someone else's expectations, she said as we paused at a vista point. Now you can watch the fourth part by pressing share and more.